and then we'll go through the so we'll go through the introductions. So please state your name and your role so the AI can pick it up and we can record the comments as we go and be able to capture the notes as appropriate for this call. This is a relatively important one, not just for the rules, but also for the zero tolerance policy we're going to go through. So I am Jeff Person. I am the UA president and head coach. Sid.
Good evening, good afternoon. Sid Caesar, Umpires Association.
Amy. We just lost Amy. Good old umpires forever.
Stephen Arnott, Vice President of the UA.
Robert Montanaro.
G'day guys, Rob Montanaro, I guess coach and umpire for Baton Rouge Tigers. I guess also now that we have combined for major games with the Bayou Brawlers in New Orleans in the Parish Football Club.
All right. All right, Steve Butler.
West Coast umpire field coach.
Andrew Tyson.
Andrew Tyson, umpire, Virginia Lions.
April.
April Munn, USAFL president.
And everybody else I'm going to be calling out is on mute, so be aware of that. Darren Henderson.
The aforementioned Darren Henderson, coach and player for Arizona, as well as a level 1 umpire.
Dave Bryant.
Dave Bryant, Houston men's head coach, also umpire for Houston and in Texas, but I also head up the coaching forum for the USAFL portfolio group.
Right. Seth, I'm assuming that's McElvaney.
Nope, this is Seth Sternberg with the DC Eagles, umpire.
Great, thank you, Seth. Sonia.
Sonny at Houston, president.
Okay, thank you. Tom, I'm not sure which Tom that is.
Hey, it's Tom Matthew, DC president.
Great, thanks, Tom. Did I miss anybody? All righty, so as people come in, we'll try and get them to get their name for the AI, and we'll start to move forward now with the rules portion of the conversation. So I'm going to hand it over to Steve Arnott, who is the chair of the Laws and Rules Committee for the USAFL UA.
Well, the good news is that not much has changed. The bad news is that the AFL still has the wretched stand law, which I loathe, but we have not adopted, so it's all good. The changes that we've adopted for this year, some of them would happen once every now and then, perhaps, but it's good to know about them. And I'll just go through them in order. Out of bounds. This is where the ball hits an umpire or an official. And if the umpire thinks the ball would have continued out of bounds, if it hadn't touched the umpire or official, then it's either out of bounds or out of bounds on the full, whichever it is. So again, that can happen, but it's just the umpire's call as to whether it would continue to go out of bounds or it wasn't going to go out of bounds. If it hits the umpire and doesn't go out of bounds, the umpire's naughty because he's probably in the wrong position or she's in the wrong position, or the player has handballed to the umpire, and I've seen that happen. So in that case, play continues. Any questions on that one? Good. Prohibited contact. This is one that can happen in the blink of an eye, and you've got to think about what's going on here. It's Law 16.4. If the attacking team gets a free kick before the ball crosses the goal line or behind line on the full or hits the goalpost on the full, then the attacking team must choose whether to take that score or retake the kick from where the infringement occurred. And again, it's up to the attacking team, and there are circumstances where the attacking team might want to say, sure, we'll take that score. Or they might say, no, we want to take the kick because we think we might be able to kick the goal. So that's on the full. If it bounces, in other words, it doesn't cross the goal line or behind line or hit the goalpost on the full, then you take the free kick where it occurs, where the infringement occurs, or where the ball lands, whichever is the greater penalty to the offending team. And that's sort of standard for what we know about sort of the greater penalty, where the infringement occurred or where the ball lands, where the ball is. So it's one that, again, can occur, but umpires have to be aware that the attacking team must decide if it goes through on the full or hits the goalpost on the full. So obviously if it hits the behind post on the full, there's no score anyway. So questions on that one? Good. Rough conduct, law 18.7.2, they've just amended that. They've taken out the words which is likely to cause injury, and the law is pretty simple now. Players shall be protected from unreasonable conduct from an opposition player, which we try and do anyway. So it's unreasonable conduct, even if it's not likely to cause injury. Questions on that one? Rough conduct free kicks. There's a new subclause there. A free kick is awarded against a player making high contact to an opponent, including the top of the shoulders, with any part of their body, unless the player was contesting the ball and it was reasonable for the player to contest the ball in that way, or unless the forceful conduct was caused by circumstances outside the control of the player, which could not be reasonably foreseen. Again, the umpire is going to have to decide this, but if it's incidental contact, that means the player was contesting the ball. It was reasonable for the player to contest the ball. Then it probably won't fall within this law. However, what umpires are going to be looking for is, as always, high contact, which includes the top of the shoulders. And this is likely to arise possibly in a player who has the ball low to the ground and is bumped high, for example. So the question is, was the player who does the bumping contesting the ball, and was it reasonable for the player to contest the ball in that way? Questions on that one?
Steve, whoever that was, jump in. I'm going to ask a question about this one.
Yeah, I was curious. Just is the change any part of their body? Maybe these are all changes, right, of some kind.
Yeah, they've added, this last one is a new subclause, so it's E, and it's designed, I think, to deal with situations where players make contact high and they're not reasonably contesting the ball, or circumstances outside their control cause them to make contact. You don't see that as often. So the question is the player contesting the ball? Was it reasonable for the player to contest the ball in that way? So if a player just sort of runs hard into a player with the ball without trying to tackle or contest for the ball in some way, then it's quite likely that, and they make high contact, then that's quite likely going to fall within this law. But on the other hand, you pay high contact anyway. So I don't know that this is going to apply unless an umpire has to decide whether there's high contact and the player was contesting the ball and it was reasonable for the player to contest the ball in that way. And I think that gets to incidental high contact in a marking contest, for example, where the player goes to punch the ball and brushes the other player's ear, for example.
This was the direct response to, was it the preliminary final 2 years ago when Jordan De Goey leapt for a smother and knocked out somebody on the way through and they had nothing they could charge him with.
Oh, the Brandon, the Maynard one.
The Maynard one, sorry, yes. This rule came exactly because of that.
They
so
addressed
he left the ground to smother, and on the way back down, out of his own control, took out another player, put him in hospital, or knocked him out. And so, but there was, other than a free kick, there was no reportable offence for him.
Yeah, and they addressed that with smothering last year, where the player elects to leave the ground to try and smother the ball. Any reasonably foreseeable high contact with an opponent is at least low impact. So that's getting towards what the match review office is going to do. And you're probably right. This is going to deal with that kind of situation too. If you're trying to smother the ball by leaping off the ground and you make high contact, was it reasonable for you to do it in that way, contest the ball in that way? Then that's a question for the umpire to decide.
See, there's another angle here, and that is if I'm a third player, I push my opponent, and that opponent then contacts his opponent, my teammate, high. That's beyond my opponent's control because I knocked him into my teammate. So that would be what I would see as a reasonably, not reasonably foreseeable, because my opponent didn't charge into my teammate.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And then the umpire would have to look at that and say, is the umpire going to pay a free kick for the push or whatever it was that caused the momentum kind of thing? But it wouldn't necessarily fall within this law because it was outside what was reasonably foreseeable by the player who actually made contact in the high contact. So yeah, I'm still waiting for a law on this pushing into a contest. We may see that for next year, but at the moment you deal with it, was it a push that was it an illegal push anyway? But please don't watch the AFL. You'll only get confused.
Yeah, Steve, I was going to say in a marking contest where we have, it's legal to contact above the shoulder if you're taking a mark.
Mm-hmm.
But where does the interpretation for that go if there's maybe two people up high going for a mark and you're maybe slightly out of position compared to the other player, but you do get high on someone's shoulders or very high towards their neck, and you punch the ball? Is that considered a fair and valid contest, or you have to be going for a mark?
I think if you're trying to spoil, you can still have incidental contact. I think what the umpire there would be looking at is it a genuine attempt to spoil the ball? Is it reasonable for you to try and spoil the ball in that way, punch it away in that way? And what was the level of contact? As I said, a brush on the ear, probably not. But if you actually do, hit someone in the head as you're trying to spoil, then that's going to be a free kick. It's a hard one because you can try and take a specky and get you all over someone's shoulders, and it's not going to be a free kick unless it's unreasonable, the so-called unrealistic attempt.
Back to that old interpretation of is your sole objective to contest the ball? So it's not to mark the ball, but to contest the ball. So a spoil is legit. So anything incidental in that is okay.
Yeah, I think incidental contact there is okay.
Yeah, but if you were late to the contest, there was no way known you were going to be able to get to the ball, or you're just trying to put the other guy off.
Yeah, correct. And then the final one there, there are reportable offences, clarification, and specific offences. The first one, 22.2.1b, is added. Notwithstanding any other provision in the laws, in all circumstances, a player owes a duty of care to all other players, umpires, and other persons, as applicable, not to engage in contact which will constitute a reportable offence being committed against that other player, umpire, or other person, to take reasonable care to avoid acts which can be reasonably foreseen to result in a reportable offence. In other words, it's really just using a lot of words to say that you have a duty of care. And if you fail to exercise a proper duty of care, then you can be reported. So it's just making it clear that it's on the players, and umpires have a duty to protect players, but it's on players to exercise a duty of care towards other players and act reasonably under the circumstances. And then the other one just renumbers the law at 22. They're the changes for this year. I don't think they're, some of them probably won't happen at all, and maybe once or twice, but it's really just the AFL reiterating the concept of care and reasonable behaviour, and continuing to emphasise that high tackles, high contact are verboten and won't be tolerated unless they're in the limited circumstances where it's incidental. The one other point that we should make is that there seems to be a somewhat greater emphasis on watching for and penalising umpire contact. And this is where a player contacts an umpire. Most of the time it's going to result in a fine in the AFL, but for umpire contact, careless umpire contact, the correct result is a free kick. I actually saw one over the weekend in the AFL. So it's a free kick if it happens in the centre, it'll be a free kick to the ruckman. If it happens around the ground, it's going to be a free kick to the nearest player on the opposing team, to the player who connected with the umpire. So I will certainly be paying free kicks for umpire contact. And interestingly enough, in the AFL over the weekend, it was one of the non-controlling umpires who paid the free kick. So, and usually where this happens, the umpire can't see the player, but the player can see the umpire, or could see the umpire. Now, they're watching the ball. That's what players do. But generally, the player has a much better opportunity to avoid the contact than the umpire does. There was one in the Richmond player, I think, the week before last, who knocked an umpire out and actually avoided any penalty. I think the only reason I can possibly see that he got off was that the umpire took 2 or 3 steps to his right to get level with the mark. And for some reason, that was right in the player's path. So that was the only reason I could possibly see that player got off without any penalty. Steve?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in regards to duty of care, we're talking about the player that might be spoiling, tackling, as having a duty of care, but also the player with the ball or the player attacking the ball has a duty of care as well. They can't lead with their head to go in, ducking their head, those sorts of things. So the duty of care goes both ways, not just for the player who's trying to defend, but also the player that's trying to attack.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it also applies for a player who dives for the ball and takes the legs out from a player, the going low one. And in that situation, the player is making the ball their objective, but the duty of care part of it is they have to do so in a way which means that they're not going to be, taking the legs out from players. Players, of course, learn, and you see examples of players trying to draw that contact from a guy who's trying to get the ball on the ground, and umpires will be watching out for that, I'm sure. So any questions on any of those? All right. Sid, this seems like an appropriate moment. I'm happy to report that we are not suing anyone and no one is suing us.
Hooray.
Excellent.
I'm looking for an opportunity.
So saith the lawyer among us.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. And if anything else comes up during the season that we need to clarify, we'll, of course, send that over to you and your committee. And thank you for the work you've done to get us set up for the year.
Sure.
With that, we will move to the second piece of our agenda, which is the zero tolerance policy that is being put in place at the USAFL level. April, would you like to introduce that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the need for this policy was really anecdotally spurred from nationals last year, where we had several incidents of what would be classified as umpire abuse. And so, in order to address that, the executive board has worked with the Umpires Association as well as Dave from the Coaches Forum to try and consolidate and make one policy in line with trying to protect our umpires and the way that the game is facilitated and make sure they're being treated with the utmost respect in the United States. And so that's this policy in particular, and for all the folks on the call to be aware of, when players are registering this year, they are agreeing to terms of participation for the United States Australian Football League. The zero tolerance policy has become one of those terms that players will agree to, and they physically have to tick the checkbox in Play HQ that acknowledges they have received the information. Whether or not they read it, that is a different story, but everyone has access to this at their fingertips and has agreed to it when they will be playing in USAFL tournaments this year. So
thank you, April. And a couple pieces to that. One, it's going to apply not just at USAFL tournaments, but literally it's going to apply at any USAFL sanctioned event, which includes club matches, club rec or metro, whichever they call it. And it applies to club tournaments those are the tournaments hosted by a club, not hosted by the USAFL. So this is a policy that has been in the works, stretching all the way back to the San Diego Nationals, where we had a lot of issues, and the head of the AFL Umpires Association was literally at that tournament and just basically reamed us and said, you've got to clean this up because this is ridiculous. If you remember and you were around, sorry, if you were around and you remember, we went to a zero tolerance swearing policy at Nationals the following year. And by about 10 a.m. on Saturday, the word had spread among the clubs that we were paying free kicks for swearing. My club played at 11, and by 10 o'clock, they'd already heard that they better shut their mouths. So that's how fast it spread. This policy today that we're going through is, I don't want to say the culmination, but it's been modified and brought to this point, starting from that point back in, I think it was 2018. And so what we're really getting to is telling the AFL that we are following the same policy that they have, which is you can't abuse the umpires. And there's, when you go through in this document, what that constitutes. The second piece of all of this is that just because we're going to say we're going to protect the umpires doesn't mean that the umpires are going to know what that means as well. So we are going to have a training session on May 12th for all of the umpires, which we'll record and have that available on our website for anybody to look at. And we're going to talk about how do we as umpires administer this policy. And we'll get into a bit of that as we go through this today. All right, so what I'm going to do, Sid, is I'll start going through this piece by piece, and please, for anybody on the call, jump in and ask questions as we go. And if it's appropriate to answer them right then, we will. If it's coming up later in the document, then we might just tell you to hold that for just a moment and then move forward. All right, so scroll down a little bit. And what we're talking about, comes out of the law number 22. And so we're going to define umpire abuse. And you'll see the definitions there, which refers to behavior, verbal, physical, or symbolic that challenges, undermines, or shows disrespect towards an umpire's authority, judgment, or decision-making during a game. And so we've got a bunch of examples of what that means just below this. Overt and covert actions, language that expresses disagreement, et cetera, can be made to an umpire or indirectly to an umpire in response to an umpire's decision. So tried to make this as comprehensive as possible. And what we're really looking for is to say, from the league perspective, from the USAFL all the way down, is we don't want to have any loopholes. We don't want anybody saying, well, this shouldn't constitute it, or I didn't know, or I didn't understand, or any of that kind of crapola. We want to make sure that you have a duty of care to respect the game and everybody involved in it. Whether you know that or not going in is no longer going to be our problem. You are responsible as a player, coach, and participant in this game to know this policy under all circumstances. So from a coaching perspective, you need to make sure that all your players understand it. From a league or from a club president perspective, you need to make sure all your coaches know it and are pushing that down to the players. So as presidents, and I'm a president, I need to make sure that all of my players are aware of this so that we don't have any issues from my club's perspective. And if every club does that, we're going to be just fine. All right, scroll down a bit. Stop there. Down just ahead of that paragraph. Yep. Other appointed persons. And so we added a paragraph here to make sure that we are talking about everybody involved in the game. So you've got players on the field, you've got umpires on the field. You can also have runners with messages. You can have water runners on the field. You've got assistant coaches on the sidelines, and you might have other players or non-playing, non-dressed players on the sidelines. Everybody is covered under this policy. So if you're jumping up and down on the sideline and making a fool of yourself, you can get reported. If you're the water runner and you start making comments to the umpires on the field, you can get reported. You are not exempt because you're not wearing a jumper. And it's not just the field umpires, as you see there in the middle of the paragraph. Field boundary and goal, and he says you see there, it's the goal of the coaches as well. We've improved the number, we've added quite a lot of coaching to the umpire association. And we have a number of them that are accredited umpire coaches. And at every event, every USAFL event, we're having umpire coaches there to keep improving our umpires. So they will be there. They cannot be abused either. And as you'll see later in the policy, they are able to report. So if you're on the sidelines thinking, hey, they're not going to hear me, I'm gonna start yelling stuff, and there's an umpire coach there and suddenly you're reported, you've been warned right here. Anybody can report. And when I say anybody, I mean any game umpire, which is the boundary, field, and goal umpires, as well as umpire coaches who are working the game. And then our senior umpires who are coaches who may not be working the game, but at a tournament and observing, which I do quite a lot of, are also authorized and may be responsible for reporting. So everybody needs to be aware that you are 100% of the time, your behavior is subject to being observed by any of those groups. And if you do something silly and you get reported, it doesn't matter if you're off the field or whatever your role is, you can get reported. We're trying to clean everything up and we're trying to leave no loopholes. Okay, scroll down to what is and is not acceptable. All right, so we'll go through a little bit of this. I'm not going to read all of this because I know you guys are able to read. So what we're talking about here, we're going to break it down to acceptable behaviors and unacceptable behaviors. So the big one here on the front end is respectfully seeking clarification on a decision, rule interpretation, or a call without using aggressive, sarcastic, or dismissive language. May I ask what that free kick was for? What can I do differently so that I don't get called for an infringement, et cetera, et cetera. Those are things that are respectful. Making eye contact or gestures for clarification as long as the body language remains non-threatening and non-dismissive. Okay, so those are some examples. There are more of what is acceptable. I'm going to move to the unacceptable piece to hit on a couple of those. Challenging or confronting an umpire's decision in an aggressive or abusive tone, yelling, swearing, certainly, sarcastic or condescending remarks. Persistent questioning after the umpire responded to a clarification request. Repeated minor disagreements. If you've got the answer from the umpire, it's done. You got your answer, move on, next play. Gestures or body language that express abuse. So as you see here, the examples, throwing your arms up, exaggerated body movements, clapping sarcastically. Those are types of things that could be constituting abuse or dissent. There's indirect muttering, that's a joke, or you've got to be kidding me. Those are minor, all right? Making comments about the umpire to teammates within earshot. No, I'm talking to my teammate. I just happen to be yelling loud enough so you can hear it, right? Those are examples of trying to be indirect. And I'll admit, I've done that years ago, trying to get to an umpire and get them rattled. As a player, I've done that. So we're going to get rid of that. That's no longer acceptable. Sniping and verbal baiting. Intentional physical contact with the umpire. That's what Steve has just talked about in the rules section. Physical approach to the umpire that could be interpreted as intimidating or threatening. We have some fairly small umpires. We have some fairly large players. If you're 6'5" and you tower over an umpire who's 5'5" to try and question a call without trying to be nice, and you want to use your physical presence to try and intimidate the umpire, that could be unacceptable behavior. Okay, scroll down, please. For those who don't have, it's available. I'm going to go to the law so that you can see where the highlights are. For those who don't have the actual download, it's available on our website. I believe the USAFL website has the laws and the USAFL interpretations of those laws available on the website. If you want to read the entire document, this is copied straight out of the laws. And what we're talking about today is highlighted on the right-hand side. We're not making this stuff up. It is literally straight out of the laws. Just in case you're wondering if we were making stuff up. This is part of us saying, we're just administering the laws as written by the AFL and modified by the USAFL. We're not making this stuff up. Can you scroll down, please? Now, not everything that we just covered above constitutes a straight out red card. There are things that are not so strong, and there are things that are very strong, and there are things that are in between. So as umpires, just because somebody says, oh, you've got to be kidding because I didn't like a mark or a penalty that was called against me, that's not a red card, right? That's minor. And so what we want to do is make sure that we control the match across the course of the match. So if things can escalate, we want to de-escalate. How do we de-escalate? And that's what our training is going to be covering on May 12th. So what are the types of penalties that we have available? We have a free kick or a reversal. We have a 50-meter penalty. And then we have yellow card and red card. So we have things we can do in order to control a match without having to go straight to a reportable offense and sending people off the field and going to tribunal. So how do we keep people from escalating from they're unhappy with the call and said, oh my God, and they threw their arms in the air, which probably isn't a report 2 minutes into the game. You need to de-escalate that. So how do you do that? Hey, you just did something that's strictly against the rules. So I'm just going to reverse that free kick. It's going to go the other direction. Or if it was a kick that your opponent had earned, I might just pay a 50 and say, all right, that's not acceptable. Let's go down 50 meters. Part of the reason for doing these things to de-escalate and let players know that we're there to administer the laws is that if I make a call to pay a 50 on something like that and move the ball 50 meters farther downfield, I'm pretty sure there are 17 other referees on that field. They're going to jump on that player who just gave up the 50 and get them to calm down. And I know that because I've seen it happen. So the de-escalation techniques that we're going to be teaching are to make sure that, not make sure, we want to encourage players to stay within the bounds of what's acceptable. And if they start to cross over, that there's a chance for them to de-escalate so that they don't end up getting a yellow card or a red card. So the de-escalation component of this policy is extraordinarily important, and we begin training on that May 12th. So part
Jeff,
of that.
can I just jump in quickly?
Yes.
Dave here. Just on the escalation piece, one thing that we and this will surely be part of the training is that at the beginning of a match, the more senior umpires tend to basically give every player their final warning at the pre-match preamble speech, and thereafter there are no more warnings. So in here it does refer to bullet point 3, verbal warning. That warning is administered before the game starts. Is that correct?
Andy, it doesn't necessarily always happen the way you've described it. So there were times when we told umpires, you have to do this beforehand. And they say there are 3 levels. There's a verbal warning, there's a 50-meter penalty, and then there's cards. You've just got your verbal warning, right? And so some umpires still do that. Some of us don't do that. I depends on the game I'm doing. If I think I need to say it ahead of time, I might. The verbal warning can also be for one of those minor things. Somebody goes, "Oh my God, I can't believe he paid that mark." I'm not going to pay a 50 unless that person has been trying to do something silly previously in the game. I'll just, hey, calm down, right? You don't want to make it, get any worse. To me, that's a verbal warning. It's like you're at the line, don't go over it. That's not the same thing as telling the players, this is your first verbal warning about umpire abuse. Because as we know, when you play, and I think almost everybody in this call plays, you're going to have emotions and you might react to something right at that moment, but that doesn't mean you need to be red carded immediately. You're going to react to it, realize that, okay, the call is what the call is, and you move on. That's okay. It might take a little verbal saying, hey, calm down, move on to the next play. So I can't give you a straight 100% of the time answer on that, Dave. So any umpire that wants to issue that warning and consider that the verbal warning at the beginning of the game, as long as they've done that, and they want to pay a free kick or a 50 on the first one, like I was just describing, if they've given that verbal warning, then they're okay. They've told the players ahead of time, don't do it. I tend to be a little bit more lenient on that, especially at the very minor stuff.
I'd recommend it, but I appreciate the answer.
Yeah. David, just in response to that, I'm always cautious of making warnings or anything prior to a game. It's like you're preempting something's going to happen, and it can sometimes backfire on you because a player may say something, you may not hear it. Another player hears it and says, well, hang on, you warned before the game, and it can actually put more pressure on the umpire. Whereas if you deal with each situation as it happens, then you can deal with that situation as it happens. So I'm always reluctant to say anything before a game because it can actually highlight that particular area and it can actually put more pressure on the umpires if they do happen to miss something.
That's correct, Steve.
I agree with Steve on that one.
Mm. And scroll down, please. Okay, stop there. All right, as you see, per 1813, a field umpire shall order free kick against a player engaging in unacceptable behavior. So we're not making this stuff up. It's straight out of the rule book, the laws. So when we give a free kick for something, we're not just saying, hey, I don't want to give a card. We're going to do something different. There are places in the rule book where we're pulling the stuff from when we have our different levels of quote unquote penalties for various infringements. Then there's the 50-meter penalty, and then the authority to apply the send-off rule, which is the red and yellow cards, to remove players from the game if they're deemed to be disrupting the game or engaging in serious misconduct. All right. The definitions, let's scroll down to the definitions. These have not changed yet. I think around, I can't remember when the yellow card came in, Steve. It's got to be at least 15, if not 20 years ago. So the yellow card is a cool down. Player is sent off for 15 minutes of game time and can be replaced. That's what we call a caution. The red card, on the other hand, the player is removed from the game. The team may not replace that player for 15 minutes of game time. The player is mandatorily remanded to a tribunal review. And that is what we call an ejection. So the form that the umpire has to fill out is a caution/ejection form, and they will say which card it is, yellow or red. So one of my de-escalation techniques when I want players to cool down is say, guys, knock it off. I don't want to get out my cards because I hate paperwork. I've used that many times. It always calms them down because they know they're about to get sent and it stops everything. Any card, red or yellow, is considered a report. The umpire will fill out that caution ejection form, and it goes to, at the regionals and the nationals, it goes to the USAFL tribunal. If it's a club game or club match of any kind, then it is up to the umpire to send that in to the USAFL, and we can handle it that way. Now, that's different from the tribunal, from the tournaments as the way this has been written. But we do want our umpires, if they have to do something at one of those non-USAFL run events, we want to know about that because we want to know which players are getting out of control. And we also, from the umpire perspective, want to know that our umpires are doing the right thing which gets the players ready for regionals and ready for nationals, so that when we apply this law at those tournaments and at nationals, it's not new. It's been applied up to that point in the year. Okay. All right, scroll down, please. All right, individual player discipline. So when you go to tribunal, and for the yellow card, it's removal for 15 minutes, but it's still considered a report. And so if it's for umpire abuse, even if it's just a yellow, it's for 15 minutes and you get to play the rest of the game, you're still going to tribunal. Umpire abuse should be assessed as a red card. We may have that reported as a yellow card, and we'll have to fix that as we go in terms of making sure the umpires are doing the right thing. Scroll down so we can see the table, please. Player history. Now, we do have some of the history from the last number of tournaments where we've been recording the caution ejection forms. So Steve and I have been involved in that for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years, whatever it's been. We've been trying to collect that data. We now have, through Play HQ, the ability to capture all of that on a permanent basis. And so when we talk about what is going to be the discipline applied to a report, we are going to be able to look at the individual player's history in terms of, have they been reported before? And when I say they've been reported, it really means that they've been reported and found guilty. It does happen. It's relatively rare, probably about 10 or 15%, where a player is found not guilty on a report. So no disciplinary record means you have not had any reports previously. Existing disciplinary record, not limited to umpire abuse. So for example, you might have been reported for striking or kicking or bumping into an umpire or anything like that. There's a long list of reportable offenses. Any of those things, it's not umpire abuse, falls into this category here. If it's no disciplinary record, minimum of 1 game. Existing disciplinary record, it's a minimum of 2 games. Now, if you have an existing disciplinary record that includes prior umpire abuse, this is where it gets real bad. So you want to make sure that if anybody gets one of these, they are on their best behavior going forward forevermore. Players suspended for a minimum of 1 year. All 3 of these are going to require the player to complete the AFL vilification and discrimination course. It's online. It takes 30 minutes. And until they have completed that course and whatever number of games they're suspended, they are no longer eligible to play in the USAFL. Not just at that tournament, not just at regionals, but any USAFL sanctioned match. I'm going to pause there because I'm going to guess there's going to be some comments. All right, let's move on. Scroll down to the discipline for the team. Now, in the team category here, we're looking at it in a given tournament. So if we're at, say, Central Regional, it's the Central Regional games that day only. If it's nationals, it's that Saturday and Sunday for that tournament only. So it applies to that specific team. So if I am Denver and I've got my A team, my B team, and a women's team, it doesn't apply to Denver. It applies to the Denver men's D1 or women's D1 or whichever team is involved when there are red cards for umpire abuse. Individuals are not allowed to train if a team gets suspended for whatever reason because of that, the cards. Individuals who are on that roster for that game are now stuck, if you will, on that roster until everything has been completed so that team is cleared to play again. So for example, if you are New York or Golden Gate and you're moving players up and down because you're trying to win multiple divisions and you end up with a couple of guys that get out of control on 2 umpire abuse cards, any Div 1 team on a D4 team that has then been suspended or put on that suspension, every player on that squad is now stuck on that D4 squad and they cannot be pulled up to D1. If it happens on the D1 team and you're trying to win D4, you cannot pull your D1 players down to D4 because now they can't play in D1. Every player is stuck until the team is cleared. So this will get rid of the opportunities for those larger clubs, if something does go wrong, if you will, that they cannot move players around and try and really stack a squad in order to avoid any player getting stuck. And it doesn't have to be the player's problem or the players that are stuck on that team. It's just their teammates, and they get stuck because of their teammates. And so if that ever happens, God, let's hope it doesn't. But if it does, I'm going to bet that the teammates that get stuck and can't play anymore are going to be pretty pissed off at their players, their teammates that got them in this situation. So we should have help with this policy to make sure that this doesn't happen. Right. Team discipline will reset on a per tournament basis. So if Austin goes to the southeast tournament, southeast tournament, and then goes to central tournament, each tournament will be counted separately. So there's no carryover from one regional tournament to the next. And there's no carryover from the regional tournament to the nationals tournament. Now, if there is a problem with a club within multiple tournaments, now we'll be able to look at it from the USAFL perspective and say, you know what, that national team, boy, they get in trouble each tournament. They don't go overboard terribly, but they're getting in trouble every tournament. We got to do something about that. We can't have this happening at a lower level every single tournament. We've got to fix it so it doesn't happen at all. So that this policy, or the bullet point here, is the policy for the USAFL to have the ability to discipline a club if there's repeated offenses across tournaments and even across years. Okay, scroll down, please. All right, cumulative reports from players on a team. Remember, not the club, on a team. Number of reports in that tournament. 1 individual player report, club gets a team warning. For umpire abuse, and you see there the parenthetical is for found guilty. Umpire abuse, one individual report for umpire abuse, club or team warning. 2 players get reported, or sorry, 2 individual player reports. Could be the same player in 2 games, or even in the same game, but 2 reports at a player level. Team is considered for disciplinary action. Coach is considered for individual disciplinary action in any category, that middle column. But if it's for umpire abuse, the team will forfeit their game. 2 guys go after an umpire, both of them get reported, bang, that game's a forfeit. You're done. The score will be points scored by the opposition to 0 for percentage purposes in that tournament. In addition, the coach is suspended until successfully completing the AFL vilification course. Now remember, those players that if they're found guilty of the umpire abuse, will also be subject to that vilification course and whatever game suspensions they get on their individual basis. And let's really hope this doesn't happen, 3 individual player reports in a tournament in any category, game score or the forfeit on the game. The coach is suspended for a minimum of 1 game as a coach. And if we go to the 3rd column there, the team will forfeit their game. Same process there, points scored to 0. And this is where it is. All members of the reported team will be required to complete the AFL vilification and discrimination online course. The reported club will not be considered in good standing. Now it's no longer the team, it's the club. The club will not be in good standing, will not be available, will be able to participate in USAFL activities until all team members are compliant. So if you now this is outside the tournament because it's going to take a while for all team members to take care of this. But your club better be on it and fixing things. If it happens at your regional tournament, you better fix things before nationals or you're not going to nationals. And the coach is suspended a minimum of 2 games. So as a coach, it is up to you to make sure your players stay in control. Now, remember, this category is pretty bad. You got 3 individual players getting reported in a tournament. Something's wrong. Something is very, very wrong to get 3 reports in the umpire abuse category. This just can't. If we ever have this box right here, if this ever happens, I personally will have 0 tolerance for any of the teams, to the point where I may not even want to assign umpires to go and do their games for a while. This category, this box right here, is really bad. And that's why the penalty is so severe. And then lastly, let's move to the last section there. I mentioned earlier about Play HQ being able to help us record everything, disciplinary records, and USAFL transparency. This goes into the Play HQ where it can be seen around the world for anybody looking at footy in terms of what goes in there from a report perspective. So anybody, anywhere, if you play somewhere else, you get reported here, it's going to be found out when you go to another league over in Australia or anywhere else where it has Play HQ. It is visible to around the world where Play HQ is visible. It'll be publicly posted on the USAFL website at AussieRulesUSA.com, and it's digitally recorded in Play HQ, and it's permanent, and it is tied to your player to you as a player for your history. Comments, concerns, questions?
Hello, Jeff. I guess I have one. This is Tom from DC.
Yep.
It was about just the individual kind of like cumulative thing. So there's like no cool off period at all for that as far as like the getting suspended for an entire year. That's just like lifetime. I guess what I'm curious about, I've been playing for 10 years, right? So theoretically, if I had gotten a red card my first year playing, I don't really know what I'm doing. And then 7 years later, I get another red card. Hey, not good stuff if we do umpire abuse. That wouldn't matter. There's no like cool down period for that sort of thing at all. There's no forgiveness after, okay, you haven't done any umpire abusing in 5 years. Like, we'll wipe your record clean. Nothing like that. I was just kind of curious.
So scroll up to the individual one. That's the team one you're on.
Yeah.
Okay, right there. Yes. So existing disciplinary record. Right now, we do have some records from previous tournaments for, I don't know, 6 or 8 years, whatever it is, but nothing's in Play HQ. And so, as you say, this is a permanent record. So if you get reported this year in 2025, and then again in 2030, it's 5 years later. Is it really a problem? It might be. I don't know. So the answer to that is yes. If you have an existing disciplinary record for prior umpire abuse and you get another one, you will be suspended. Now, that doesn't mean the AFL may not look at it and say, yes, it is a suspension for 1 year. However, because it's been so long and you have been a clean player and you've played 17 tournaments in the meantime, maybe they'll do something different. That is certainly at the USAFL level. So the tribunal will look at what's going on and decide, does this make sense? Does the penalty fit the crime, so to speak?
Okay, so the tribunal kind of has some, like, it's not just completely out of their hands. They can make a decision. Okay. And then I guess just going off what you said too, is there, if those prior things are going to be in there, like I would just like to know who, if anyone on my team has kind of like a record like this. I don't really even know, honestly, like will prior stuff make it into Play HQ, or are we going to sort of just start fresh? And
we haven't addressed that particular question yet about taking the prior stuff. I see April nodding her head. So we have stuff and we have the records of it, but it's not in Play HQ right now. We haven't addressed that question yet. April, has you talked about it at the board level?
Very briefly at the board level, what I'll say is, from our perspective, the need to put this policy into place was spurred by 2024 nationals. The 2024 disciplinary records that we have, those will be transferred into Play HQ because we are aware that there are still outstanding penalties that have not been fulfilled by clubs and individuals that received them. So 2024 history from US nationals will be put into Play HQ. We have not discussed as an executive board going back further than that. That being said, we would look to the UA and their recommendation. The other thing I'd like to point out is those players that do have existing Play HQ profiles already, we can see their complete disciplinary history already, right? Once you're a player, on the back end of Play HQ, how they verify the who's who, it's not like you can create fake profiles, right? So we are trying to adopt this uniformity around the world, and that is directive from the AFL. And that way, we've standardized the process, and all leagues, the expectations are very clear. So we do already have players that have existing disciplinary record from their time playing in Australia. But that is the reason for some of this transparency, right? Is because of the new software adoption, we're adopting the policies to also report back to everyone else in the same manner that they're reporting to us. So hopefully that
Tom, I
gives a
just
little
want to
bit
be
more
clear.
clarity.
Yeah, and Tom, I want to be clear about my response to your direct question. The policy is the policy, and the penalties are the penalties. When I said that the tribunal may decide to do something different, I'm not saying they're going to even consider doing something different. Doesn't say they can't do something different, right? They're not prohibited from saying, hey, it's been 8 years since he got reported because he said, I can't believe that was a free kick, and he got reported for that, which is probably not really appropriate. But if the tribunal just says, you've got a second one on record now, and it's a 1-year suspension, and they don't want to consider modifying it, there's no way you can say you have to take a look at the history. It's been 8 years since the last one. You can't force a tribunal to consider making a modification to the penalty. Not saying they can't, but you can't force them into it either.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not trying to give any, a really negative response, but that seems, a year. Okay.
Yeah. So somewhere down the road, we may look at it and say, you know what? We might want to say there's not just a moratorium,
like a cool down. I don't know what you would call it. I just,
what's the
that was
legal
my
term
only,
for that?
it just jumped out to me where it's like theoretically someone who has 2 umpire abuses over like 8 years and now they get suspended for a year. Like, woof. Yeah.
Maybe,
I don't know.
yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm just nitpicking, but that just jumped out to me. Anyway,
Maybe
I'll
the
shut
bell
up.
tolls at some point. Steve,
Yeah,
you have
I don't know.
Yeah, Steve Arnott has his hand up. Steve.
In that hypothetical situation, and without any prejudice to how I might act in that situation if I were on a tribunal, I would make that argument that it's been 6 years, 7 years, whatever it is, since the prior discipline, and it's within the power of a tribunal to suspend, but then suspend. So impose the discipline, impose the penalty, but then suspend that pending good behaviour. But that's up to an individual tribunal. Jeff's quite right. They don't have to do it, but they could certainly respond to arguments that you make along those lines.
It's a good point, Tom. And as we go forward, like I say, we may need to make, or might decide, not may, need to, we might decide to make adjustments to this policy going forward. We'll just have to see how everything plays out.
Yep. Cool. Thank you.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Other comments, questions, concerns? Cheers. Raise the roof. Are we happy? Does this work for umpires? Not sure that's a good response. Dave, I have a question for you. We do not have a whole lot of coaches on the call. There's a few of us that are filling multiple roles. And as coaches. We have a lot more coaches who are not on this call. So we absolutely need to get this out to them long before, not like the day before, but long before regionals. So what are we planning on? How do we get this out to our coaches? Because we're not going to accept I didn't know as an answer.
Well, I'll defer to April, but it's already gone out to all the head coaches, men and women. So it's already there. So if there is no intended meeting or otherwise to further engage the coaches directly on this, other than the general forum of seeking and responding to feedback or any questions.
We should probably send the recording of this to them to say, as a follow-up to the policy, here's the discussion. And as a reminder, if you choose not to view it and your penalties get applied and you say didn't know, it's unacceptable. So I'm hoping that's what goes out to the coaches.
Yeah, I think, well, I would expect April, we're planning to send the recording to the entire distribution list, which included presidents and coaches, correct?
Correct. So on the 21st, the actual zero tolerance policy, as well as the laws of the game and interpretations, so both attachments went out and were circulated to club presidents, as well as the full distribution list for coaches that we have on file for 2025. Happy to circulate to that same audience the recording from the call. And as a reminder, right, we told you 4/21, the policy goes into effect May 17th. That is your notice. You've had the opportunity to, call in to watch the recording. It's posted publicly on the website. Every single person that registers for Play HQ, which is a requirement to participate this year, they accept the terms to participate. So there should be no excuse that people and individuals throughout the league have not received this information.
April, are you intending to send it to individual players? That was something I understand was being considered.
We can do that as well. We prioritized getting it linked to Play HQ registration. So we can do that as well. Yep. Thanks, Amy.
Does anybody have any comments, questions, concerns before we sign off? Very good. I hear none, so we'll consider this concluded. So, Sid, you can kill the recording.